Good evening, class. Bit of a different video today. We're going to take a look at Cuphead the game and Cuphead the TV show and look at what the differences are in how they're animated. Now, it won't take you 5 seconds to research the development behind the Cuphead game on YouTube. There's lots of rich resource ripe for research out there, so I won't get bogged down too much about the process. Partly because I myself have already done it before, but I will go over the basics, just so that we can compare that process to the very different process behind the TV series, and so that we're all on the same page. The visual appeal of the Cuphead game stems from the appearance of cartoons from the early years of popular Western animation, ranging from roughly the 1920s to the 1950s. Many tend to refer to this as the golden age of animation. Notable elements of this era that Cuphead has picked include very bendy characters demonstrating a style which we call rubber hose, where characters often do not adhere to real-world anatomy or physics. Detailed and smooth animation with a new drawing every frame, referred to as animating on ones. Often unnatural and peculiar movement, including looping animations and weird transformations, and the overall recording quality of the time, which gives the visuals a grainy, blurry and unrefined appearance when compared to today's broadcast standards. Many cartoons by Fleischer Studios exhibit these traits. Likewise, the production of the game itself attempts to replicate the original production qualities of that golden age, with everything being animated on paper with pencil. At the time, animations would be roughed out and neatened up on paper, then traced with ink onto clear sheets and then painted from behind, and then photographed in order. The animators in the game, however, scan in the drawings onto computer and then colour them in Photoshop, and these images are then exported either as an animated file or an image sequence and used that way instead. Planning the animations for the game would require testing out movement and action using rough keyframes to get down the timing, and then going over all these drawings with what's called a rough pass and then a clean pass, ready for scanning and colouring. A lot of iteration would be required at this stage to test out actions before committing to finished line work. The whole process is lengthy, skilled, and requires planning and teamwork. Skip forward some years after the release of Cuphead, and Netflix commissions a TV show based on the game called The Cuphead Show. There's a notable difference in the appearance and the movement of the characters in the TV show when compared directly to the game. Firstly, the whole aesthetic, while recreating the look and feel of the characters, is much cleaner. This is because the episodes are produced digitally. The animation now uses a process called rigging, where the animator uses digital assets of a character's body on a computer to essentially use them as a puppet, keyframing individual parts at certain points in time to give the appearance of movement. This requires character designers to meticulously produce each part of the character's body to be anchored to the rest in certain ways, while also accepting traditional frame-by-frame animation within these puppeted assets. The software used is called Toon Boom Harmony, one of the industry standard pieces of software for TV show animation. There's still likely the process of iteration using traditional frame-by-frame rough passes to block out the timing and movement, and these tests are then used as reference for the rigging and animation process. When using 2D rigged puppet animation, you do run the risk of characters looking tweened, which is where some movement looks almost calculated and can lack appeal and charm. This is only really an issue in shows with perhaps much smaller resources or budget or tighter deadlines. But if you combine a rigged puppet with some cleverly placed keyframes, you can recreate the frame-by-frame look of older and traditional cartoons. The whole process is lengthy, skilled, and requires planning and teamwork. Unlike the game, the show takes more of a modern inspiration for its movement and animation style, opting for a more zany and wacky approach more akin to cartoons like SpongeBob and Ren and Stimpy, and other more sophisticatedly rigged shows like Star vs. the Forces of Evil, Hilda, Cat Burglar, and Final Space, just to name a few. Now, we're not necessarily discussing the content or narrative of neither the game nor the show in today's video, so I'm not really encouraging hot topics on whether you perceive the show to be good or bad as such. We're looking at the skills involved, the differences in process, and the end result. There are things which rigged animation can do well, and there are things traditional animation can do well. Both processes require a high skill level and understanding of animation to achieve the level of appeal they both have. For instance, the show has characters with lighting at the edges, which is called rim lighting, which traditional animation has a tougher time producing, though this can also be added in post-production. While traditional animation on paper is a lengthy process, you're free to be a bit more organic with the movement of your character, exaggerating things a little more easily. Replicating this organic style of animation is a little trickier with rigged puppet animation, as you have to ensure the rig has been built to allow these movements and that the rig itself doesn't break or look unusual. That's not to say it can't be done, but it requires much more care, whereas on paper, you can simply draw this to happen as you please. The show does its job adding effects on top of the footage to emulate the feel of the game, such as a slight film grain to simulate an aged film, the characters' shadows to simulate the film cell look. But it doesn't go all in the way the game does, because while the game is going for authenticity, it still needs to be accessible, resulting in you being able to refine the appearance to your taste, which you can't do in the show. The backgrounds in the show were created to replicate the watercolour style appearance of the game, though whether it's actually watercolour or a digital equivalent I haven't been able to find out. Though judging by the fact that the number of backgrounds is apparently in the hundreds and hundreds for the show, I'm more inclined to think that they're digital paintings, but do correct me if I'm wrong. Now, the show has characters interacting with the set in a 3D space much more than the game does, so this has to be taken into account when designing both the characters and the backgrounds. In the game, the background serves purely as a space for the characters to move around on, and they don't really interact with it all that much. Though both the show and the game use a real built set in some cases to increase that authentic feel from older cartoons, which also did this. Something both the game and the show do really well is have characters be able to move around in and be seen from all angles, which requires a strong understanding of anatomy and solid drawing, as well as strong technical skills. I don't know if you've ever seen what a rigged character looks like in Node View in Toon Boom, but if you don't ever touch nodes, this may look like a nightmarish mess. You have to know where to find and how to move specific parts of a character, and the more detailed and sophisticated your character rig, the more complicated it'll be to animate. This requires clear communication in your animation team, and the character designer and rigger need to make this rig as drivable for the animator as possible. Similarly, with the game, the list of required animations is likely in the thousands. While the process of animating traditionally is relatively straightforward in comparison, keeping track of how all these animations transition together and which ones fit where is a whole different world of information to keep in your head. The game is taking inspiration from those old cartoons, but it is still a game, and animations need to work together as such. Game character animations tend to fall into one of three categories: looping, transition, and linear. Is the animation going to loop over? Is it going to transition into another animation, or is the animation going to play once and end? These are the things you think about when creating every animation for a game. So, can we draw a conclusion from this? I set out to simply assess the different processes and make note of any pros or cons each process offers as a small case study. Could the show have been animated on paper, and could the game have been animated with rigged puppets? Certainly, but the resources and processes would be different. If the show was animated exactly like the game, it would have been much more expensive and time-consuming, most likely. Let's not forget, the DLC, which recently came out when this video was made, was in production for 4 years, not only involving animation but programming as well. The show has been in production for many years also. If the game was animated exactly like the show, then it would be a slightly quicker, albeit trickier process, but I think the overall feel and tone wouldn't be the same, even if rigged puppets could work a little easier within game development software. We know the show isn't attempting to capture the exact aesthetic of the golden age of animation in the way the game is, but rather it's attempting to capture the feeling of the characters and the tone of the game itself. I know I said earlier we wouldn't talk about narrative, but that was kind of a trick, because ultimately everything does come back to narrative. There's not much character development for the show to build from. The game exhibits very little of this, but it is there. The show needs exaggeration and its own appeal, so it works as a piece of entertainment. Though the game is replicating a certain appeal, it does begin to take on its own. It has become its own thing, and the show is attempting to capture that as honestly as it can, while using modern tastes and techniques in comparison, as well as a general chaotic energy which derives from those golden era shows anyway. So, to sum up this short video, Cuphead and the Cuphead Show use vastly different processes to capture similar appeals, but they do differ in apparent ways which creates a different feeling for each. Neither process is necessarily easier than the other, but both require different resources and ultimately end up aiming for slightly different audiences. Well, that's that. Take it easy. Catch you next time. Thanks to my pates for funding this. And stay cool. Love you, bye. What are we playing?
Cuphead.
Who's your favourite character in Cuphead? Cuphead, Mugman, or Chalice?
Chalice.
Why is Chalice your favourite?
Because she's yellow.
Who are we fighting now?
Sally.
Yeah.
Go, Miss Chalice. Go, Miss Chalice. Go, Mrs. Chalice. Go, Mrs. Chalice.
Mrs. Chalice. Oh no! What happened?
We're nearly finished.
Did we win?
No.
What happened? Did we die?
Now we're just gonna be dead.